The winter of 2017, I was in a pretty tough place. My second startup company, 90s Fest, was teetering on the edge of failure. I was in a drawn-out fight with my best friend, who was my co-founder of that company, and I was ending a 10-year relationship with my childhood sweetheart, moving to a new city in Los Angeles and just experiencing a lot of change. There I was, a Wharton graduate and a Morgan Stanley investment banker who was applying to dozens of jobs each week with little success. And I was feeling like I was not going to be able to pull myself out of this situation. And then I got a phone call, and the phone call was from a friend of mine, and we'll call him Charlie. And Charlie at that time represented to me everything that I had failed to achieve. And so when Charlie called me, I listened. And what he told me was that he was evaluating a new startup company in the music space called FYRE, and he was interested in investing, and that they were producing a music festival to promote this new app that they were building, but they needed a little bit of help with logistics. And given that I had experience both as a festival producer and an entrepreneur, he thought that I'd be a good fit for the role. And within 2 weeks, I was on my first flight to the Bahamas to spend a month on Great Exumas and work on the festival. And you see, I had heard of FYRE Festival before, and my first instinct was that this is probably too good to be true. But when I saw the promo video that came out and heard that they had sold out 2 weeks in a row, I decided not to trust my intuition. I had been a festival producer before, and the reality is that anything that goes wrong in this industry usually does. And this was no exception. And so I had an opportunity at that point to leave, but I decided to stay. If you've seen any of these documentaries about the festival, then you kind of know what happens next. And so I've had to ask myself, why did I stay? And I think that what I was suffering from is something that many of us suffer from, especially in today's kind of social media driven society, which is FOMO. It's this kind of toxic form of envy that makes us feel like what we have is not enough. That gets accelerated today as well, because everybody gets pushed by the internet and by large social media companies exactly what it is that they feel like they lack. So if you feel like you're not pretty enough, you're going to see a lot of beauty influencer posts. If you feel like you're not rich enough, you're going to see a lot of get rich quick opportunities online. And if you feel like you want to be famous, then you'll see some celebrity posts. And so, how do we counter that? The first important thing that I've discovered is awareness, right? And it's an awareness that what we see is not always what we get. I think back to some of the things that I was sharing on my social media when I was on that island, and it was like a beautiful beach shot, and view from the office today could have been worse, right? And meanwhile, I'm sitting in front of a computer working on spreadsheets for 20 hours a day, going through one of the most stressful experiences of my life. If I wasn't able to share my full story with everyone on social media, then I have to assume that others are doing the same. In addition to that awareness, I think it's also important to feel gratitude. While I was going through all of these challenging times when I was introduced to this new company, I still had a lot of things to be grateful for. My health, my friends, my family. I was able to put food on the table for myself. There was plenty of things that I could be grateful for. And I think that if I had come from a place of gratitude, then I would have been able to stand confidently when identifying that something was wrong, spoken my truth, and then walked away. And kind of looking back, what I've learned from this experience is, one, to be vigilantly aware that everyone is going through it. You're not alone. And to trust your intuition, to trust yourself, and to work from a place of integrity to your values. And in that way, you can kind of avoid a situation where this culinary masterpiece that you're promised turns into just another cheese sandwich. So that's it.
Well, welcome back to the People Being Real show. I'm sitting here with my man, the one and only Marc Weinstein.
What's up, Mark?
Dude, thank you for coming on the show, and thank you for sharing so beautifully your experience with the FYRE Festival. You guys probably, if you've seen the documentary on Netflix, you recommend Marc. He was one of the heroes of the story so beautifully. I mean, you were so articulate and insightful as to your experience down there at the FYRE Festival. And I just have so much admiration for like you and your story and how you stand for what you believe in. And for everybody, Marc is a very intelligent man. He explained a little bit of some of his background in his opening story there, but Marc has got a finance background originally before you got into the kind of the festival production business. And you're heavily involved in cryptocurrency, as well as you're a speaker and an advocate for humane technology, which is something that is near and dear to my heart. So I've been excited to get mic'd up with you.
Same.
And you know, what's so funny is we had met actually right around the time when you were hired for the FYRE Festival.
Yeah, I didn't know if we were going to talk about that. That's awesome.
We might as well, right? I mean, we might as well talk about it. So,
yeah,
you know, you were doing the Winning Weeks program, and you went down there, and you were kind of reporting back on the weekly calls about what was happening.
Yes.
And we were like, well, if they said they were going to pay you, I guess you got to trust them. Like, it was unclear what was happening, but you know, I remember watching it from afar, and then on Twitter the day that, you know, shit hit the fan and people were coming down there with the cheese sandwiches and stuff, it all clicked. I'm like, oh my God, that's what Marc has been telling us about now on these calls for the last like 4 weeks. So
I remember those days, man. That was crazy.
It really is crazy, because I know at the time, as you kind of mentioned, you were starting the next phase, I think, of your career. You're starting a new chapter, and that was kind of one of the last straws in terms of you letting go of some things that weren't, I think, serving you in terms of, you know, owning your voice and standing for what you believe in. And just so interesting that it came in the form of the FYRE Festival.
Yeah, it's so random. I mean, it's like it was a tiny little event on an island, you know, 2,000 people max. And for some reason, it's captivated a lot of people's imaginations. I mean, we're like 6 months out from the documentary now, so I'm sure people don't care as much. They've moved on to Bad Blood and other stories, but I think it's relevant. I think the reason why so many people found it interesting, or one of the reasons, was because it really captures some of the cultural phenomena that are happening around us today with influencer culture and kind of this toxic entrepreneurship, you know, this fake it till you make it culture that we've built, which is in some ways like perverting the American dream. But yeah, when we connected, you know, we were in this program that you started, Winning Weeks, and you were coaching me. And it's funny because at the time you were like, look, you know, I'm hearing you. It sounds like it's tough, but like, stick it out. That's kind of the way, you know, go through it. And it was honestly the greatest advice, because here I am talking to you right now about this experience. And in spite of the fact that it was like this massive failure and this quasi disaster, what I experienced, you know, especially the day after the festival, and kind of helping to evacuate 1,100 people off the island, and working with the locals to get them their houses and cars back and all that.
Yeah.
You know, I now get to share my story with people, and I feel like that's having a much more positive impact. Had I left, I could have been able to be like, I was the guy that left and I knew everything and I was so smart, but like, I never would have had that real raw experience that's taught me so much and gotten me here to like sitting in this chair speaking to you right now.
That is so wild. You know, I love that, because it was like it was a shitstorm that you were in. And I'm sure when you came home, it was probably like, what the heck? Like, I'm curious, what did it feel like when you got home?
I was so confused, you know, like I left, I was like feeling proud in this weird way again, because, you know, like the day after Billy and his team pretty much left, and there were like 5 to 10 of us producers who stayed not getting a paycheck, who were responsible for who felt responsible for getting people off of the island. And it's, you know, it wasn't like a survivor situation. Like thank God the worst thing that happened was someone stepped on a sea urchin, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, it felt like there wasn't any security, there wasn't any medical, people were drinking. And luckily, you know, these charter companies are responsible for getting people back safely. So we moved up like 5 flights and got everyone out of there. And so, you know, I felt really proud showing up the way that I did, but also was like a little bit PTSD-ish, because it was, you know, 4 weeks of nonstop work, asking myself, like, is this really happening as it's going down? And it kind of led to like a little bit of confusion, but I took some time and moved on, you know. And then of course, 3 months later, I get a call from Vice to interview with this documentarian, Chris Smith. And, you know, I was like, I don't really know if I want to be involved in this anymore. But he caught me at a good time. They're like, look, he's in LA, go meet him. And I went to the premiere of his other documentary, Jim and Andy. And I was blown away by the story that he told. And I was like, someone's going to tell this story. And I feel like this is the guy that's going to tell it the right way. And so I went to speak to him the next day at Vice, and all the cameras and things were set up.
No way.
And I was like, he's like, I don't do pre-interviews. I'm like, okay, you know, like I had a choice. And at the time I was feeling really open, and I spoke to him for like 4 hours. Okay. It was extremely cathartic. And then a year later, my life is totally different, right? Like new relationship, finally settled into LA, new job, things are going really well. And this documentary is about to come out, and everyone closest to me is like, what were you thinking? Like, why did you agree to be in this? Yeah. And I didn't really know, you know, how I was going to be portrayed, or, you know, because what I've learned is like through this process is like the media, documentarians, news shows, whatever. I think we know this at an intellectual level, but they can control the narrative and spin it in any way they want. And so I was really terrified that it was going to hurt me. And it came out, and I just got lucky, I think, that the reception was positive. You know, FYRE was only big because of influencers, right? It was a small festival, and there's a number of like luxury festivals across the world that, you know, you can pay $5,000 and go stay at a villa on the beach, and there's really like exclusive people there, and it's super cool, but it's private and people don't hear about them, and, you know, and they're small, and so they kind of go under the radar. And the irony of FYRE was like it was also very small and very exclusive, but like it created this FOMO effect leveraging social media, and it tapped into that emotion of essentially envy. You know, like I want to live this way. I want to live like an influencer for a weekend. And so, you know, the social media narrative of like how this tech is affecting our mental health and creating these issues, I think FYRE is almost like it's just an example of that.
With that lesson of the FYRE Festival, I'm curious to know, and like obviously people really resonated with the story, especially in real time, and, you know, the memes, and it just, I mean, it went viral as it was happening in real time, the catastrophe, the disaster, and then the documentaries, both documentaries coming out at the same time, one on Netflix, one on Hulu, also being, you know, big critical successes in terms of, you know, buzz and, you know, those people were talking about. So I know you said like, you know, that was the flavor of the week, and people might have moved on to, you know, the latest flavor, the latest headline, but I'm curious to know if like your perception as to if there has been any change or forward progress as a result of what happened at FYRE and everything that's transpired since.
Well, the beauty of the documentary on Netflix that I think I'm super excited about was, you know, Marianne appearing in this documentary, this Marianne Roll, the restaurateur from Exumas, who fed us, the staff, like the whole month. You know, they were cooking like full on catering. She hired up staff. She took out a loan. She was in debt for this and didn't get paid back. And through the documentary, we were able to raise awareness and create a GoFundMe, and she got paid back like 5x, amazing, which is awesome. Right. You know, and I'm like super happy for her. She's an incredible woman, and her family as well. I'm happy for them. And, you know, we then kind of tried to follow on with that and do a GoFundMe for the workers that built the site, because these are, you know, many more people who are literally writing their names and hours on a piece of paper and getting paid in cash that didn't get paid after their last work days. So we're still raising money for that. I know that, you know, other people who are in the documentaries are doing their part and contributing. And Chris, I think the director of Netflix, contributed a pretty large sum after he got his first royalty check. And so that's like one really positive thing specific to FYRE. Outside of it, I think FYRE really led to the sponsored post for influencers, right? Like now I don't think people can really get away with advertising a product or an experience without taking some kind of responsibility via this is an ad, right? Or this is sponsored. And in some ways, it's kind of like also like a hidden way for Facebook to make more money, which we can get into. But at least like I think it's important for individuals to know when they're being sold something. So before FYRE, I don't think there was this sponsored post, and now it's necessary when you're promoting something.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious to know your take on authenticity in general in this FOMO culture. I'm kind of, and in this social media world that we live in, where we put our highlight reels on social media because we get the validation we seek. It feels good. It's scary to be vulnerable and put yourself out there. So I'm just kind of curious to know what your kind of take is on authenticity, especially tied to the digital world.
I wrote a Medium post about like my experience with FYRE and how I think it kind of fits in a broader context. Yeah. And my conclusion at that time, this was like August 2017, was we need more authenticity on social media. We need more people to share, their full story. And that was my kind of conclusion. Now, like with 2 more years of reflection, I've actually kind of backed off of that a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you why. Let's assume that Instagram was just private. And it was your private photo collection and video collection on your, just for you and your family. When I think back to like VHS videos, like my dad filming, birthdays when I was 2 or 3 years old with the big camera on his shoulder, the things that we filmed and captured were still the highlight reel. Mm-hmm. It was still the birthdays and the vacations, and maybe you'd get like the rare footage. I think this is the case for most families. Some people might have captured everything, but we get the rare cases of like crying on the Disney trip or somebody like pooping their pants or whatever. And
those are priceless. Those are some of the best, best inside jokes I have with my family.
Yeah, exactly. And so my thought has come to like this is a technology that is meant to be the highlight reel. Mm. And so, we're not necessarily going to get people to share everything. Yeah. And that's okay. Yeah. And now people are sharing, with a broader audience, and it's meant for consumption. And there's definitely a higher touch curation with filters. And so I think instead what we need to cultivate is awareness. Mm-hmm. It's so easy to get swept into the state of envy when you're scrolling through your social media feed, because there's always someone prettier. Mm-hmm. There's always someone wealthier. And like even simply, if you have 150, 200 friends on your social media account, there's always someone on vacation.
Sure. 100%.
And it's like, why don't I travel? And it's not the case. That's just what they're sharing. Or someone's, having a baby or getting married. Those are just the things that get shared. So if we're aware of that, then at least we know we're not alone, and that people aren't sharing their whole story, and you just don't, it helps to not be selectively envious. Like we become envious of a specific attribute, like someone's job, but we wouldn't necessarily want to walk a day in their shoes.
I agree with you entirely. And I've kind of got on a little bit of the same journey in terms of looking at social media and openness and vulnerability, and, wishing that more people would, share a little bit more of their stories. And at the same time, like, I get that most people are not going to share as openly and as vulnerably as like just say I would, or maybe if you're listening to the show, maybe as you would, and being okay with that. What I think is like really interesting, what you're saying is like, it's the perspective that's important. It's that reminder that while you're scrolling through your feed, not just focusing on that one detail. This person seems like they're killing it professionally. I wish I had, their life, whatever. And being able to have that perspective to see it from the fuller picture. So I think that's a challenge. And I do believe that celebrities, or the more people who do have the courage to share a little bit more of themselves, that is what provides some of those bumpers to me of those elements of perspective. So whether it's this Instagram feed that you used to have, a reminder, should I be scrolling? Maybe that's all someone would need to see in their feed for the perspective, like, okay, I get that this whole thing is not real. I'm just, diving into it right now, take it for what it is. If I want to get back to something else that I'm working on right now, I can, or I can continue to scroll if I feel like it's serving me in some sort of way. But I know for me personally, Marc, that as someone who experiences anxiety and fear and jealousy and envy,
you mean a human?
Right. Yeah. But what I find is that it's when I'm in those moments of those thoughts, it's sometimes tough for me to see outside of them. And it is with that perspective of seeing somebody else being like I just made a post yesterday. Like I found a quote of Sandra Bullock saying that like she's
I saw that.
like a joyful, optimistic person, but also has fear and insecurity. It's like, obviously we all know that, but just seeing that, if you see that in a moment when you're feeling some fear and insecurity, it's like, I'm sorry. It's like, oh,
I'm just like,
it's like, oh, okay. Like I'm not alone in this. And I think that that's like, you know, what you alluded to in your story. It's like, none of us are alone in our struggles and our doubts and insecurities. And it's like, we don't need to necessarily hear someone like share like their deepest, darkest secrets or anything, but just to know that we're not alone in a moment when we feel isolated and alone is so liberating and so empowering. And it's like, here's a perspective shift available right in front of you.
Yeah, and I think the way you described it as bumpers is so key, because I think it's like doses of it is crucial, doses of authenticity. I think we can get into a place where like anything gets too extreme, like there's like authenticity porn in some ways.
Sure, yeah.
You know, like people that are almost leveraging like vulnerability and sadness to like create their own story. Like there's like YouTubers that it's like almost like it's inauthentic.
It's a sales technique.
Exactly.
I mean, I'm seeing it more and more as people are realizing, oh, vulnerability works. When I'm a little vulnerable, I get more likes on my post. But then at the end of the post, it's like clearly pointing to a sale.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like
exactly. So
that's a little manipulative.
So it can be like everything can be manipulated, whether it's technology or emotions or anything, and they can serve for good purposes or bad purposes. Yeah. I struggle with this so much because I started the Look Up podcast, which is starting off being about humane technology and our relationship to social media and to tech in general and how it's affecting our culture and our mental health, and speaking to experts and yet I'm so human around my social media. Like I'm so I talk about social media addiction because I spend probably 5 hours to 6 hours per day on my phone. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I'm trying to work on and build healthier habits around. So it's not like I'm coming from a place of like, I don't do this, so you shouldn't do this. It's more like, how do I get myself into healthier habits?
Yep.
Two, the irony of this FYRE thing was they put my that photo, view from the office today could be worse in the beach, and it had my handle in it. And so all of a sudden I started getting a pouring of Instagram followers. And I went from just like being, on my social media, just sharing with my friends whatever the heck I wanted, to now like, oh, there's people watching. And it's kind of like almost like quantum physics, where like, a particle changes just by being observed. Like the nature of that particle can change. Now that I know that people are observing, all of a sudden it's like posting something is more stressful, or, I want to post something that's aligned with the message that I'm trying to share. And so as an example of this, I was in Joshua Tree this weekend and we did like a photo shoot in a bathtub. We were like doing like the influencer photo shoot. It was hilarious and fun. And it was a beautiful photo. And I was like really questioning if I should share it, if it was aligned with, who I am and what I want to represent. Yeah. And ultimately I decided to share it, but I even had like this shame around it to the point where I shared it, but added like, it's okay to share this kind of thing as well. And as I'm saying it, I'm like really saying it to myself. Yeah. To remind myself, like, it's okay, dude. If you want to post the fun picture of you, in a bathtub in the desert, like go for it. Like you don't need to throw it all. We don't need to throw it all away. Mm-hmm. But I think I'm experimenting with different techniques. Like there's this one post that I did where I love people that are posting this real versus real, REEL versus REAL.
Oh, I haven't even heard of that. I got to check that out.
It's so cool. It's like side by sides.
Oh, nice.
Or like you could flip through. And so I was posting from a trip that I was on recently. And we captured like the beautiful sunrise shot of like the mountains over the ocean. But in the background, it was like 550 other tourists walking up the same trail, like a traffic jam on the trail, trash everywhere, that people are throwing, people flying drones in the background.
Right, yeah.
disturbing the experience. And I felt like, okay, what if I shared the beautiful photo, but then also shared a little bit more about what was happening in the background? So it's not just like trying to cultivate a, like, look at me, look at where I am, I'm so cool, but also like, yeah, I really love this and I'm grateful for this experience and I want to share that. But you know, it was imperfect. And so sharing that imperfection. And I guess all of this is to say that I'm still trying to figure out the right level of authenticity on social media.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to vary for everyone. But as you said, like, doses of authenticity are like medicine for everyone. Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. Marc, I want to ask you 5 kind of quick rapid fire questions as we kind of get into this next phase of the interview. And just because we were talking about authenticity on social media, might as well start with a nice hard question here that I'll answer myself afterwards. But my question for you is, what do you feel most of the time is your motivator to make a post on social media?
My motivator to make a post on social media is to get acknowledgement. Like the core motivation, right? Like that's why we're sharing. It's to, you know, the dopamine kick of those likes is probably fundamentally, like at a base layer, what is driving most people to post. Now, if I extract that out like a layer, what I would have wanted to say there, speaking of authenticity, is like, because I believe in the message that I'm trying to deliver, it's not my message. It's something that I think is important to share. Because it can help others. And it's probably some healthy combination of the two that sometimes skews more towards, you know, I really need likes right now because, you know, 5,000 people unfollowed me in the last 3 weeks and like I'm human and that hurts my psyche, to like, wow, that was incredible what this person said on my podcast and like that really affected me and I want people to hear that.
Thank you for being real and sharing that. It's something, you know, that I'm like obviously aware of as well. You know, as a guy who's got a handle called Are You Being Real and a podcast all about authenticity. And there was a point when I was like playing the follow unfollow game, like where I was like literally paying essentially for followers.
I remember when you outed yourself about that.
Yeah, I said that in the TEDx talk because I actually felt really relieved once that site that I was using, Instagram, once that went down, I felt free from that. But I mean, I know that that's still a big part of social media. And oftentimes if you're seeing someone's account who has 50,000, 100,000 followers, like high likelihood that they're buying followers or have in the past. High likelihood.
It triggers me.
Despite how much engagement they have. That used to be the thing that I used to look at, like, oh, okay, well, how many followers do they have? How many likes? How many likes
the followers? Yeah.
But still, I'm finding that most people with a lot of followers, unless they're like, you know, Justin Bieber, which maybe he even bought followers too. But a lot of people like that. It's easier to buy followers.
It's easier to buy followers the bigger your account is because it's kind of like hidden within the real followers. I saw this the other day. A friend of mine followed me on IG and I followed him back and I hadn't seen his account in ever. And it was like 95,000 followers or something. And it triggered me. Yeah. Because I saw the post were like 100 likes and I'm like, it triggered me and I really needed to sit with why did that get me so angry?
That's the smart question. You're not just angry, but you're asking yourself why.
I have no idea why. I'm like, why do I care? Like if he wants to buy followers, you know, good for him. Like that's great. But for some reason there was a sense of self-righteousness, you know, which is ridiculous.
Yeah. Since we're assessing our social media usage, I'm also on social media a lot. And I've always cared about connection. I mean, it's why I'm building an app called Love Bomb and why I send videos to everyone I know on their birthdays. Like I care about people. I care about connection. I care about social status. Like I hate saying that, but I do care about that. It's something on a deep level that is something that does drive my actions and stuff. But you know, why do I post stuff on social media? I mean, at this point, part of it is like I want to give this podcast and my work the best chance of reaching as many people as possible. It does, you know, create dopamine and likes, and I can like, oh, this person, you know, like my post. It's kind of like a faux connection. It's not like necessarily like a real heart-to-heart connection with someone, but in a way, it's better than nothing. It's better than like just sitting isolated and alone behind my desk all day. So I definitely think there's like a validation component to it. But what I have found is kind of where I'm at right now, is like anytime I'm like posting like a picture of myself, like I'm like instantly challenging myself before I post it. I'm like, why am I posting this? Like, do I want people to like see my life? Do I want them to see like this moment of my life, or is there something more meaningful? So I thought you said it beautifully, that if you feel like you have a message to share that isn't just self-serving, that's going to make you feel good and validate, but it will also support somebody else as well. I think that that's like a beautiful motivation and a great way that you can utilize the platform.
I always go back to, if this has had a positive impact on one person, in spite of whatever ego drive I have, then it's been worth it. You know, and that's fundamentally true. Like, but again, you know, I get swept up in all the shit. Like when I first started thinking about like the podcast and this new social media following that I had, I started doing the quote game. So I was doing like a lot of just like other people's quotes, right, and like the pretty, like one tile of quote, one photo, one tile of quote, one photo. And it like looks really nice. And, you know, and it's still my personal account. It's not the podcast account. And I just felt like I turned it off and like after 5 posts, because I realized that I'm not there yet. You know, like maybe Russell Brand or Jay Shetty, or, you know, they can be posting quotes all day, and it's maintenance for them in some ways because they need to be producing that content, but I don't need to, you know, be posting quotes for the sake of posting quotes. Even if some, you know, I don't know. Then again, I go back and forth on this stuff. I don't have the answers. It's so hard.
I think the important thing is just to be able to look yourself in the mirror and be real as to why you're, you know, making posts or why you're not making posts. I mean, I think that that's what it comes down to, is the awareness to the deeper lying motive. And then with that awareness, you can be like, all right, I'm going to do it anyways, or maybe rethink it. So I think with that, you know, with that awareness comes the opportunity to innovate and make sure that, you know, you're being near and dear and true to your heart.
Totally.
Another question that I want to ask you, what is success to you?
Yeah, that's something that I'm still trying to define. In a lot of ways, you know, I am successful. In relationships, you know, like cultivating friendships, cultivating a positive reputation amongst my peers in my industry, which is like now the blockchain industry, as you mentioned. But you know, there's a lot tied up in the word success and kind of in the American dream, which is often financial. And so that's something that I've been working through, is like redefining my definition of success, because there's like, you know, there's the double-edged sword of being an achiever, where it constantly drives you forward. Like there's like a natural curiosity and a natural desire to build and create and succeed, quote unquote. But that also can create a situation where it's like you're climbing a mountain and then immediately looking to the next peak, and just not feeling a sense of self-worth. Or I can climb a mountain and then look to the next peak and not feel a sense of self-worth. And I think having like clear definition around success would help me with that. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, actually, in this journey, is redefining what success means for me. So we'll see. I recently, when I've been on the road speaking, I've been talking about karma yoga, and I've been practicing yoga for 10 years, and it's been super helpful in my life, going through like these ups and downs, which we all experience. And karma yoga is it's the yoga of action. And it's basically for householders, you know, people that aren't going to go and be monks, you know, and just be devoted to practice every single day. But the practice is, okay, well, if I'm a householder, if I'm someone that has a job and a family and I need to act in this world and I can't just go be an ascetic, how can I still practice yoga? And the answer that's provided in the Gita is basically you act without a desire for or fear of or attachment to the outcomes of your actions. And so I think that is like, the idea of success is very outcome and achievement driven, whereas the idea of karma yoga is very much process driven. So like another, modern example of someone that preaches karma yoga, I believe, even though he doesn't necessarily call it that, is like Barack Obama talks about, you just focus on the work. If you just focus on the work every day, then that can have its own sense of fulfillment. Mm-hmm. So that's where I'd like to be. And though I speak about that, I've been really reflecting and getting real with, am I actually living that in my life on a daily basis? And so now I'm starting to make changes in my life that better reflect that reality.
That's beautiful. Thank you for your honest answer. I think it's interesting when we look at success in maybe a different realm, not looking at it just from like a financial standpoint, or, it's the quality of your relationships. It's the way that, you spend your time doing the things that bring you the most joy. If you're consistently living in your light versus suffering in your darkness. I mean, there's so many different ways that you can spin it. And what I think is interesting, and I think it's like kind of tied back to authenticity as well, because some people will say, oh, well, authenticity is just like, doing whatever the fuck you want, like regardless, of other, how other people think, and, just always, following your heart and stuff. And at the same time, like, we do live in a society where, and we do naturally as human beings, we're social animals, like our health, like the part of our health is based off of the strength of our social ties. If we feel depressed, if we feel disconnected, there's scientific studies that maybe you won't live as long because you don't have those social ties. So the point that I'm making here is that I know that it's not necessarily tied to an outcome, but if we're only doing things that we feel like we need to do, and we're not in relationship with others as to the effect of our being or the influence we're having on others, then we're not setting ourselves up to ultimately be successful or to have that level of fulfillment. So I think that there's a piece of that where you can't be reliant on the cause and the effect. But once again, I'll use bumpers as the analogy again, that I think that feedback from others as to how we're showing up in our relationships, whether it's, professional, like the amount of dollars in your bank account or how much you're making, or like, whether you feel like you have people you can talk to about anything, like those are good indicators that not only might you be authentic, but you're also living in alignment with other humans.
Yeah. I think you mentioned,
it's where it gets tricky, but
you mentioned status earlier, like, like we are social animals. And I think, if you go back to like primates and chimpanzees and some of our closest relatives, it's not the external threat that kills. It's kind of being ostracized from their communities, right? And so status within that tribe is a major driver of, success in that environment, which is in the form of kind of continuing your lineage, finding a partner and things like that. And so I think we're still such animals, and status is an important driver, a feeling of like just, social connection, as you said, or having some kind of just social recognition is valuable at like a primal level for us. Like
my last question to this part of the interview is, I'm curious to know where you think we're heading as a civilization and technology.
The world is ending. Yeah. Wow, that's another really good question. I definitely don't know. But I guess, one of the reasons why I'm in the blockchain industry is because the promise of the internet has been broken. The promise of the internet was an open network. It was World Wide Web. It was peer-to-peer, information sharing. And what we've ended up with is actually, a select few large scale companies that have centralized the vast majority of value capture on the web. And what we as individuals on the outskirts or the nodes of those kind of central powers have become is essentially commodities who are leveraged and milked for our data, which is the new oil in the internet, in today's internet. It's valuable. It's how advertising decisions are made. It's how the machine keeps operating. and we are only compensated for it via the convenience of using these platforms like Facebook, Google, Amazon, Netflix, etc. What I think the promise of blockchain technology offers is to give people a way to privately hold their own information and in a secure fashion without trusting a third party to securely hold it. You think about all these hacks that have happened, even Facebook. I think, some ridiculous number of accounts were hacked. Experian with credit score data, things like that. Now, if each of us individually can hold on to our data and share it at will with third parties, whether they want to push us an advertisement or sell us something, or they're doing a study and receive value for it, I think that that's an important paradigm shift that I hope we'll experience. The dystopian version of that is that blockchains are immutable and every bit of information can become, etched. And so when I think about things like social scores in China, where every action gets recorded digitally. So if you cross the street and there's some facial recognition that you're crossing the street illegally or jaywalking, it bumps down your social score, and then you don't have access to basic services, like they won't let you get on a plane or on a bus or rent a car, or there's that Black Mirror episode where they have social scores, and everybody ends up being like in the 1950s, where they have to kind of fake it a lot in order to maintain that status as like a true way to live. Like it actually becomes your livelihood. That's the dystopian version of a future enabled by blockchain tech. But I think more data privacy, more ownership of our own information, more value back to the endpoints, and a renewed focus on peer-to-peer is kind of a key to the future that we want. And I guess just like I'm blabbering, but just like the second order consequence of us retaking the ownership over our own private information is that we can flip the attention economy on its head. So one of the reasons why many of us, the vast majority of us, have, I won't call it behavioral addiction because I spoke to someone who kind of convinced me not to use that word. Let's call it bad habits around social media and technology use, while we're spending 6 hours a day to 10 hours a day on our phones and screens, is because there are tens of thousands of engineers on the other side whose sole purpose is to get you coming back for more. Why? Because their economic model is to to get paid for pushing you advertisements based on the data that you provide them. And in order to capture more of that data to push more targeted advertisements, they need you to keep coming back. And so if we flip the model on its head of data ownership and take it away from these central parties, then we can flip the attention economy on its head and get more intentional around the way that we're using tech, rather than it just being a massive advertising tool.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. Thank you for showing us the contrast of like what it could be, then the dystopian version.
Dystopian version is crazy.
I mean, it is it is crazy, and like technology is evolving so fast. So, I mean, I'm just a huge advocate for tech with a heart.
Yes,
is like what I'm all about. So, thank you for just being a leader in this movement. Appreciate you, brother.
I appreciate you.
What can we do to support you?
So check out the podcast. It's called the Look Up Podcast with Marc Weinstein. You can check it out on iTunes or Spotify. The website's thelookuppodcast.com. I've got some writings on there. If it resonates with you, if it's helpful to you, let me know, share it. Guest recommendations, would love for you to come on the show and
Sounds
talk about
good.
authentic sharing, and what you've been doing here. And that's really it. Otherwise, like, put your phone down for a little bit and get out there and do something fun in the world. And that would be supporting the message.
Beautiful. Well said. And what final words of wisdom, inspiration, advice you have for listeners of people being real to live a beautiful, bold, authentic life that they're proud of?
Yeah, we're all going through this together, right? Like these rapid changes, the fast-paced technology, the feelings of anxiety and potentially depression and FOMO and fear of failure and lack of self-worth. These are all shared cultural and psychological issues. And so the one piece of advice I would give is we are not alone. You are not alone. If you're feeling something, seek help, find others, find community to support you, because you'll quickly realize that it's not you, that it's actually just broader issues that we're all going through together.
Little mic drop. Thank you. The one and only Marc Weinstein. Such a pleasure to have you on the show, brother. Thank you for your insightful sharing and all the important work you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Cool.